Welcome to Mystic Realms Recap. Links are in the description below. Please show some love of the author and me. On to the show. The burly man with a scar was swept away by the sword, but he was not at all flustered. He had already seen through the fact that the kid was merely a brute and his fighting skills were not worth mentioning. With the double-edged sword in his hand, all he knew from the start was only chopping. Although it looked impressive, it was actually not fatal. He knew that what he needed was a little patience. The burly man with a scar had thought it through. As long as there was a chance, he'd order his men to attack the mage. The corridor was narrow. Without the protection of this brute force kid, he might not be able to resist the siege of more than a dozen people even if he was formidable enough. Besides, he should be a mere low-level mage, otherwise, he would not have exhausted his mana with a single spell. Now he had to rely on this kid with brute force to buy time for him to restore his mana. What was the difference between killing a mage who had exhausted his mana and killing a chicken? That was what the burly man with a scar thought. Then he heard Sean's howl. The howl that was full of rage awoke half of the Sylvan Inn. Sean no longer had the simple and honest demeanor at this time. His originally strong body, similar to that of a black bear, was further thickened at once. His tanned face was frenzied and ferocious. The initially honest youth was full of bloodthirsty aura at that very instant. The scar on the burly man's face began to distort as he witnessed this astounding scene. Although he held the machete tightly in his hand, he had involuntarily taken a step back. It was a subconscious action, just like wild animals involuntarily taking flight when faced with stronger predators. All of this was far beyond his comprehension. From a rookie with mere brute force to a monster emanating a terrifying aura, all had happened in the blink of an eye. Go. All of you, go. In the face of this unprecedented fear, the voice of burly man with a scar had become hoarse. There was a dead silence in the corridor. Only the hoarse holler of the burly man with a scar and Sean's heavy breathing that was like that of a magical beast could be heard. The dozen robbers seemed to be scared dumb. Nobody dared to move a step. They just gawked at Sean, watching as the monster approached them step by step. And then, there was an outright massacre. How threatening and aggressive the dozen robbers were when they'd rushed into the inn earlier on. However, in just the twinkling of an eye, half of them were wiped out. After the furor, Sean was just like a violent and ferocious magical beast. It was merely brute force and disorganized chops, but when the brute force was increased to the extreme, the power brought on by it had turned out to be so appalling. Every sweep of the huge double-edged sword in his hands was accompanied by the sound of breaking the air. Every strike contained endless power. There was no struggle and no resistance. It was only the purest of killing and the sound of chopping that would drive anyone mad. In an instant, the blood that was spattered had dyed the Sylvan Inn into a sea of red. Everyone felt suffocated, having witnessed this horrible scene with their own eyes. The burly man with a scar was utterly dumbfounded. He could only watch the killing helplessly. The guests in the inn stared with their mouths agape as they kneeled at the doors, completely forgetting to stand up. The middle-aged man who claimed to be a felon aristocrat did not even blink. His mouth, which the gold tooth was knocked out from, was wide open. His chin was covered with blood, but he was too dumbstruck to stretch out his hand to wipe it. There was an incredulous expression on the coquettish maidservant's face. Looking at Sean, who was in a state of rage, and then looking back at Lin Li, who was nothing but relaxed, was like seeing an elephant getting banged by a mouse. As the bloodstained sword fell once again, the last survivor fell down at last too. The previously clean corridor was filled with corpses now, most of them still holding on to their incomplete weapons. Blood gushed from the huge wounds and slowly flowed along the corridor and down the stairs. Only the burly man with a scar was left of the dozen people who had charged to the second floor earlier. He still could not believe that all of this was real. He had always been proud of his strength, but in front of this monster holding the double-edged sword, he had turned out to be weak and frail. Boundless fear surged from the bottom of his heart. For the first time, he felt that he was so close to death. The burly man with a scar broke down thoroughly when Sean began to approach him slowly. Plop. Then, everyone saw the imperious robber kneel stiffly on the ground. "Don't kill me. Don't kill me." The double-edged sword hung around his neck, but it did not come down heavily on him. The rampage potion only strengthened the physical strength and stimulated the desire to kill in the heart, but it would not blind the mind of the user. Although Sean had killed more than a dozen people, he was still lucid. After he had halted his sword on the neck of the burly man with a scar, Sean cast an inquiring glance at Lin Li once more. The burly man with a scar was not stupid. Upon seeing the monster's gaze, he suddenly realized that the mage who had been standing at the door was the one who would decide his own life and death, so he quickly turned to Lin Li to beg him for mercy. Unfortunately, he did not understand what kind of person Lin Li was. That was the man who killed a level 14 magic shooter without hesitation. Your plea for mercy came too late. After leaving this sentence behind, Lin Li walked down the stairs without even turning back. The Sylvan Inn was uninhabitable, too many people had died overnight, and the smell of blood was too strong. He'd have nightmares staying at such an inn. Ah! When Lin Li walked to the side of the carriage, another scream rang out from the inn. After a while, Sean emerged from the inn. After the previous slaughter, his clothes had been soaked with blood, but Sean had been hunting magical beasts with his father since he was young, so he was used to blood. Moreover, he came from a poor family and couldn't bear to throw them away. Hence, he left the inn wearing the sticky, blood-stained clothes. Sean, change into these first. Lin Li searched the ring of endless storm, but could not find clothes suitable for Sean. In the end, he chose a rune robe for Sean to make do with it for the time being. Oh, Sean received the rune robe meekly and looked at it with some curiosity. Then he quickly pulled off his bloody clothes and put on the large rune robe. However, his black bear-like strong figure was very unkind. What was originally a loose rune robe looked like a burglar's night tights on him. Just make do with it first. I'll get you new clothing in the day. There was nothing that Lin Li could do about it at the moment. The two men's statures were vastly different. Presently, Blackstone Town was unlighted and dark. Even if they had the money, they couldn't find a place to buy clothes. Mr. Fellick. The 2 bottles of potions you gave me. After Sean had put on the rune robe, there was a hesitant look on his face again. He wanted to ask what the 2 bottles of potions were, but he was afraid to anger Mr. Fellick once more. The yellow one was stoneskin potion, which can make your skin tough. The red bottle was rampage potion, which can greatly enhance your physical strength and stimulate your inner desire to kill. Oh, you know why I made you fight them? I don't know. Sean shook his head frankly. I only know that anything Mr. Fellick says is definitely right. Lin Li chuckled resignedly, and did not continue. Even Jirian couldn't help admiring the gift of this simple young man. He shouldn't be merely a low-level adventurer. Although he was hired in name only, Lin Li, either intentionally or unintentionally, was constantly offering Sean opportunities. There was no reason for it, nor did he expect any returns from it. He simply could not bear to see Sean waste his talent. It was just like how Anduin had helped him back in the Sunset Mountains. Sometimes, the improvement of strength was that simple. Constantly fighting, and constantly honing. It was a long night for Lin Li. First, he was tormented by Sean's snoring for most of the night. Then, he was woken up by the knock of the coquettish maidservant at the door. Before he got to return to his room, the members of the Bloodwolf's thieves had come. Lin Li thought it was not far from daybreak, and he was too lazy to find another place. So, he leaned his head on the carriage and intended to spend the night like that. Mr. Mage. He was just getting a little sleepy when someone tapped on the carriage. Lin Li poked his head out of the carriage and asked angrily, "What?" Then, he found out that the fellow who had disturbed his dreams was the fat man who had his gold tooth knocked out. Lin Li recalled that he had called himself a felon aristocrat earlier on. The fat aristocrat showed some fear at once when he saw Lin Li's hostile expression. He had witnessed the mage's companion kill more than a dozen people in the twinkling of an eye. He did not want to irritate the 2 men who could kill without batting an eyelid because of something wrong he'd said. So he carefully considered the words with a pleasant smile on his face before asking, "Hello, respected mage, may I take the liberty to ask if you're going to Alana?" "MHM. That's great." Despite Lin Li's indifferent attitude, his affirmative reply delighted the fat aristocrat. The latter leaned forward mysteriously. "Mr. Mage, allow me to introduce myself. My name is Duger, an aristocrat of the Felon Kingdom." "What's it got to do with me?" "Because I'd like to hire you." "Of course, your powerful companion too." Hire me?" Lin Li almost choked on his saliva. "Yes, Mr. Mage. I'm willing to hire both of you for a high price. After you've escorted me safely to Alana, the remuneration will definitely be at least a 4-digit sum." Lin Li rolled his eyes. "A remuneration of at least a 4-digit sum? Is that 1,000 or 2,000 gold coins? Well, that's a decent reward, isn't it?" The fat aristocrat sounded rather pleased. He thought he couldn't have read it wrong. Although these two men were strong, they had to be quite hard up. Look at the mage robe he was wearing was so worn and old, and he couldn't even take out a decent wand. Even more so his companion, who was more powerful than a magical beast. The leather armor on him had to be worn for at least 10 years. The huge double-edged sword had killed more than a dozen people, but how could the fat man not see that it was entirely due to his strength? He could stab the dozen robbers to death even with a wooden stick. How could they not be tempted by a 1,000 gold coins with their financial situation? Mr. Mage did not respond, and the fat man was not in a hurry to rush him. In his opinion, this was just a means of raising the price. 3,000 gold coins, what do you think? 3,000 gold coins? You're so generous. There was some derision in Lin Li's smile, but when it fell into the eyes of the confident fat man, the very same smile seemed full of elation. You agree? Mr. Aristocrat. Just as Lin Li was about to reject his offer, someone else was approaching the carriage. Mr. Mage. This time, it was the low-level adventurer who had a few of his teeth knocked out. This fellow had it worse than the fat aristocrat. The latter only had a golden tooth pulled out, but he actually lost several teeth. When he shouted Mr. Mage, it was leaky and indistinct, which made Lin Li all the more uncomfortable listening to it. Bloody hell, would you all let me sleep? Lin Li cursed inwardly. The dissatisfaction on his face was apparent. Greetings, respected mage. The Blackstone town was enveloped in a curtain of darkness, and it was pitch dark around the carriage. The mercenary who had his teeth knocked out could not see clearly the look on Lin Li's face. He rushed forward and ignored the fat aristocrat beside and introduced himself. My name is Hank, a member of the Silver Hand Mercenary Corps. What? Lin Li clenched his teeth as he struggled to suppress the urge to punch someone. It's like that, Mr. Mage. May I venture to ask if you are interested in joining the Mercenary Corps? Lin Li was about to go crazy. The fat aristocrat who intended to hire him had yet to leave, and here came another invitation for him to join the Mercenary Corps. Mr. Mage, would you consider it? The Silver Hand has a well-known welfare system. We have a monthly salary of 300 gold coins plus team rewards after the completion of the task, and there is a 30% discount for all internal purchases. With the strength of you two, you could be promoted to a leader position very soon, and when the time comes, you will be able to command a team of adventurers on a large scale. The adventurer with missing teeth was rattling on, but Lin Li felt all the more drowsy as he listened. He really had the heart to kill someone now. He hadn't slept for most of the night. He had finally managed to kill the robbers, but now he was being harassed by these two fellows. Lin Li had endured all he could so that he would not blast them all away with a fireball even when he was towering with rage. Moreover, Mr. Mage, the toothless mercenary who was still chattering endlessly, was not aware that he was in great danger. There was a lewd smile on his face as he leaned forward to Lin Li, obviously intending to share some secret with him. The Silver Hand is famous for having many beauties. Not to mention our captain, Alana's most prominent beauty. There are several other squad leaders who are all cream of the crop, especially the beautiful warrior who has just joined the mercenary a few days ago. Her blonde hair and beautiful legs are totally gorgeous. Blonde hair? Lin Li's heart tingled. And beautiful legs? Yes. What's her name? I think it's Ina. F***ck. Lin Li grabbed the toothless mercenary by the collar and dragged him into the carriage, at the same time threatening, if there's no such person, you are going to die. The toothless mercenary looked at Lin Li contemptuously. Damn it, everyone said that mages had cleansed their heart of all desire. How could there still be such a devilish pervert? He could even give up his life upon hearing the blonde hair and long legs. By the way, Mr. Aristocrat, aren't you going to Alana? Lin Li thought it made no difference bringing both along since he was already bringing this one. So, he decided to count the fat boss in as well. 5,000 gold coins for a single trip, do you want to come or not? Come. Of course I'll come. The fat aristocrat got into the carriage without another word. These days, it would cost about 3,000 to 4,000 gold coins to hire one mercenary. It took him only 5,000 to find 2 such powerful bodyguards. Only fools would reject it. To the surprise of the fat man, the journey after that turned out to be a safe one. They set off from Blackstone Town at dawn and saw Alana by evening. Not to mention thieves and robbers, they did not even come across any decent magical beast along the way, causing the fat boss much regret. If he had known, he'd have set off on his own. He had also spent 5,000 gold coins in vain. This ride had cost him too much. As the carriage was about to enter the city, the toothless adventurer pointed at a building outside the city as he introduced it to Lin Li enthusiastically. Mr. Mage, the mercenary station is right in front. Would you like to say hello first? Lin Li wanted to meet Ina quickly, but looking at the weather, he shook his head regretfully. I have something to do today, how about tomorrow? You tell me the place, and I'll come to see you early tomorrow morning. The official letter from Alana Council had made it clear that all mages participating in the trial had to arrive within 5 days, and those who failed to arrive within the stated time period would be unable to participate in the trial. Lin Li carefully counted the days. They were delayed for 3 days in Gerosis and had spent more than a day on the road. If they hadn't reported at Alana Council before sunset, he could imagine the unpleasant look on Jirian's chubby face. No problem, the toothless adventurer replied coolly. Look for me at the Adventurers Guild tomorrow. I am just going to submit a task there. Okay. Accompanied by the crisp sound of horses' hooves, the carriage drove briskly towards the capital of Felon Kingdom. Alana was 100 times more prosperous than Gerosis. After being bombarded with questions by the city guards, their carriage passed through the lofty gate. What appeared before Lin Li was a straight, wide road paved with shiny stone slabs. The clear sound of the horses' hooves rang whenever they came in contact with the ground. What's that? Lin Li seemed to return to the time when he'd first arrived at Gerosis City. Everything in front of him was so novel and curious. At this time, he was looking up at the sky in surprise. A few magical beasts had just flown by. Mr. Mage, the fat man in the carriage, had never seen such a bumpkin mage before. In order not to disgrace himself, he had to whisper to that fellow, that's the Skyguard's griffin riders. Griffins? At the fat man's mention of it, Lin Li recalled that Anduin had once told him about the griffin, a level 13 magical beast. They were suitable to use as a flying ride after being tamed. Nobody's controlling them? However, Lin Li still had some doubts. The capital of Felon Kingdom actually allowed anyone to fly in the air? What if one day they decided to throw something down from the sky? It could crush a person to death. They are one of Felon's imperial guards, directly subordinate to His Majesty, who dares to control them. Oh, Lin Li nodded his head earnestly, but he envied those guys who were able to fly in the sky. He secretly made up his mind that he had to ride on one of those someday. The carriage slowly entered the city and drove steadily forward along the crowded street. With Jirian's familiarity with Lin Li, how could he not have known that this fellow was a country bumpkin? So, he had drawn a map of Alana for Lin Li before he left. In order to prevent the latter from losing his way, he also marked the location of the Guild of Magic with a red circle. At present, Lin Li was staring at the red circle. To be honest, Jirian was thoughtful. The old fellow was certainly much more considerate than Anduin, who didn't even provide him with a map. The bad thing was that the map he drew was a little abstract. Lin Li was unable to understand it even after flipping through it for half a day. What on earth was painted on it? Except for the red circle, there were only messy lines on it. Lin Li couldn't help scratching his head. Is this east or west? Mr. Aristocrat, may I ask you something? What is it? May I ask, where is the Guild of Magic? You're from the Guild of Magic? The fat man who claimed to be an aristocrat was astonished. The young maggid seemed so unsophisticated and was dressed in shabby clothes. He definitely did not look like someone from the Guild of Magic. Could it be that this was all an act? No, Lin Li shook his head honestly. Before he reported to the council, he was not really a member of the Alana Guild of Magic. Oh, the fat man let out a sigh of relief as he helped Lin Li with the directions, all the while thinking in his heart, he scared me there. How could someone from the Guild of Magic be so poor? Under the guidance of the aristocrat, Lin Li finally found a magnificent building. The Alana Guild of Magic and Jerosis Emerald Tower were completely different in appearance. The Emerald Tower stood alone, and here was an infinitely huge complex of buildings. The main building alone occupied almost the whole street. From a distance, it felt solemn and primitive, while at the same time emitting a mysterious aura. As the carriage approached the main building, they saw an open gate. A dozen mages in long robes were entering and leaving the building hastily. Lin Li stood on the carriage and looked inside. The guild hall was at least several times more spacious than the Emerald Towers. Large groups of mages were busying themselves in it, but it did not seem crowded at all. Mr. Aristocrat, I have something to see to, so I won't see you anymore. As soon as he halted the carriage by the street, Lin Li took Shan and walked towards the direction of the gate, regardless of whether the aristocrat agreed or not. Darn it, the fat man cursed, but there was nothing he could do about it. That was the Guild of Magic, he wouldn't have the guts to rush in and haul them out anyhow. Lin Li entered the spacious guild hall when he suddenly remembered that he did not know whom to report to, so he cleared his throat and intercepted the mage next to him, who looked to be in his 40s. Hello, excuse me, where should mages who have come to participate in the trial report to? Participate in the trial? The middle-aged mage shot an indifferent glance at him, and there were some mockery on his face. Are you from the Jerosis Guild of Magic? You've arrived early. Why didn't you just wait until the trial was over? Ah? Lin Li was bewildered. Which Guild of Magic did not arrive a few days ahead of schedule for the trial arranged by the Supreme Council? Only Jerosis is the most promising indeed, arriving just before the deadline. The middle-aged man finished his sentence with a poker face and looked at Lin Li again. Jirian must give the Alana Council an explanation for this matter. For now, you'll go handle the paperwork with me first. On the way to handle the paperwork, the middle-aged mage continued, My name is Darian, but you'd better call me Mr. Darian, because I'm one of the in charge of this trial. Darian your head. Lin Li cursed in his heart, but he was all smiles. Understood, Mr. Darian. The trial procedure was not complicated. Other than filling in the necessary information, it was Darian who would be arranging the temporary lodging. Lin Li was also notified of the points needing attention in this trial. After filling out the materials in the guild hall, Darian took Lin Li through the corridor and out through the back door of the guild hall. Outside was a linear path with sycamore trees planted in lines on both sides. Surrounding the trees were wreaths of flower beds. The songs of birds and the scent of flowers filled the whole place. Darian did not talk much along the way, he merely took Lin Li to an old building. You'll be staying here for these 3 months. Darian's face was expressionless and his tone somewhat stiff. Okay, Lin Li did not say anything, but looked around. The environment was pretty nice, it was much better than the Emerald Tower. They went into the empty hall and all the way up the stairs to the second floor until they came before an unlatched door, where Darian stopped. He took out a bunch of keys from his pocket, and after going through them, he picked one out and handed it to Lin Li. This is the key to the room. Lin Li nodded but suddenly remembered something. By the way, Mr. Darien, does my companion also stay here? No, the middle-aged mage shook his head impassively. Only mages who are participating in the trial can stay here. As for your companion, the guild will arrange another place for him. Oh, Lin Li heaved a long sigh of relief. Fortunately, he would not have to squeeze in one room with Sean anymore. The tragic experience in Black Hills town terrified him whenever he recalled it. Darien left after the accommodation was settled. After watching the middle-aged mage leave, Lin Li gently pushed open the unlatched door. Compared with the one gold coin a night room in Black Hills town, this dorm was much more spacious. The living room alone was more than twice the size of the inn's room. There were also all kinds of furnishings in the living room, such as an antique wooden table surrounded by several rattan chairs. The afterglow of the sunset penetrated the balcony, sprinkling golden rays over the living room. Through the bright glass windows, Lin Li could clearly see the flower beds and sycamore trees that were downstairs. Lin Li's eyes swept through the room, his heart filled with admiration. This was indeed the Alana Council. The accommodation was much better than the Emerald Tower. But, why were there 3 bedrooms? Just as he was wondering, he heard a quiet noise, and one of the bedroom doors opened. Then, he saw a fair young man coming out of the bedroom. He was wearing a black mage robe and looked about the same age as Lin Li. He had a genteel disposition as well, but the excited smile on his face made people feel uncomfortable. As soon as the young mage came out of the bedroom, he asked eagerly, "Felix from Gerosis?" Machem Lin Li nodded and asked in puzzlement, "You are? Great." The young mage smiled in excitement and introduced himself enthusiastically as he welcomed Lin Li into the living room. "My name is Mason. I'm from the Chavan City's Guild of Magic. Felix, if you need any help, just say it. Don't stand on ceremony with me. We'll be roommates for the next 3 months." Roommate? Lin Li stood blank for a moment. This dorm is for 2 people? Of course not. Mason shook his head. How can 2 people live in such a big dormitory? There's another person who lives here in addition to us. Only then did Lin Li realize that such a big dorm was not for him to live alone in. But that fellow, you'd better leave him alone, Mason said as he glanced stealthily at the bedroom opposite them, and pointed at his head with his finger. He has a problem here. Perhaps Mason was satisfied with Lin Li's reaction, for he patted him on the shoulder gaily. Anyway, you just have to hang out with me, Mason, and I promise you'll get a good place in this trial. I am a level 9 mage. Idiot. Mason was bragging when the closed bedroom door suddenly opened. A pale young man stood in the bedroom. He was about the same age as Lin Li and also looked genteel, but the feeling he gave Lin Li was quite different from Mason's enthusiasm. The feeling that this guy brought to Lin Li was as if everyone owed him tens of thousands of gold coins, and there was a chilly gloom in his bones. Oren, whom did you call an idiot? Say it again if you dare. Whoever shows off his magic level is an idiot. Leaving that sentence behind, Oren closed the door again without even taking another look at Mason. Mason was infuriated by his words but couldn't barge into the room, so he could only shout at the closed door. Oren, come out if you dare. I must teach you a good lesson. Lin Li watched the farce from a side and shook his head helplessly. Whoever shows off his magic level is an idiot. Mason did not understand the meaning of the sentence, but Lin Li was absorbed in ponderment about it. With his almost perverted mental strength, his judgment of magical wave could be said to be so keen that no disguise could escape his eyes, including the mana concealment potion that he drank. Oren's disguise could fool everyone else, but it absolutely could not be concealed from Lin Li. Almost at the moment Oren opened the door, he knew that this guy was not just a level 9 mage. Judging from the magical wave he was emanating, he was at least a level 10 magic shooter, and might even had reached the peak of the level 10. This meant that Oren was also a cheater. Standing at the height of a level 10 magic shooter, looking back at a level 9 mage was indeed like an elephant looking at a mouse. This was a difference in realm, no strength or skill could make up for it. It was like the feeling of utter powerlessness Lin Li had when he was facing an archmage like old Merlin. Oren was indeed qualified to say that. Of course, Mason didn't see it that way. I don't know what he has to be so arrogant, carrying a dead man's face all day long. After screaming at the door, Mason's anger finally subsided, but he still looked a little resentful. He sat on a rattan chair and continued his unceasing complaints. He really fancies himself a magic shooter. If he was a magic shooter, why would he participate in the trial? Yes, Lin Li nodded with a guilty conscience, then quickly took the opportunity to divert the topic. Oh yes, Big Brother Mason, what on earth is this trial for? Perhaps it was because he was being addressed as Big Brother, but the anger on the guy's face disappeared immediately, and he revealed an excited yet lewd smile. He reached out and patted Lin Li on the shoulder, then said with great emphasis, Brother Felix, you've asked the right person by asking me, Mason. I'll tell you, I'm afraid there's no one else except me who knows what this trial is exactly about. Oh? Brother Felix, we're not strangers, so I'll tell you frankly. Mason looked at the closed door again, then lowered his voice with a mysterious smile and whispered to Lin Li, my uncle, Morris, is one of the leaders of this trial. He told me all about it. Lin Li did not expect that this roommate, who seemed to be quick with his intimacies, actually had such a strong connection. Brother Felix, let me tell you, this trial is quite different from those of the previous years. Mason smiled in contentment before continuing. There are 24 guilds of magic, including the Alana Council. We will be divided into 8 groups to complete the trial missions that will be announced by the Supreme Council. 3 in a group? Lin Li understood at once, so this was the reason for the strange arrangement of the accommodation. The Alana Council had it planned from the start, that's right. Mason nodded. Us too, and that Oren. Lin Li had the thought to die. These 2 fellows, one being overly enthusiastic and unable to shut his mouth once he opened it, and the other being haughty as hell, as if he couldn't care less about anyone else. What were the prospects of passing this trial in the same group with these 2 fellows? Don't be afraid, Brother Felix. The look of disappointment on Lin Li's face turned into one of worry when it fell into Mason's eyes. The guy beat his chest and assured, although you are a little lacking in strength, I, Mason, will not abandon you. You can rest assured if you just follow my lead. Even if we exclude Oren, I will guarantee you'll be able to bring a decent placing back to Gerosis. Then. Thank you, Big Brother Mason. Lin Li could feel the corners of his lips twitching. Ha 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 ha. Brother Felix, you're too polite. Mason pretended to be modest, but the smile on his face was unusually bright. Big Brother Mason, and then? Lin Li had to whisper a reminder, seeing the fellow had become delirious with joy. Oh, right. And then, Mason remembered the matter at hand and quickly put away his smile before continuing, according to Uncle Morris, in order to ensure everyone's safety, there will be an archmage assigned to follow each team. The archmage will not participate in the trial mission, remaining passive except when we are in real danger, but if he does interfere, it would mean that the team has failed their mission. I'll tell you, Brother Felix, it'll most likely be an archmage from Siena who'll be assigned to our team. The look on Mason's face was unusually mysterious when he said this. How do you know? Heh. Mason took a glance at the surroundings, then revealed the lewd smile on his face again. My uncle arranged for it. He's old friends with the Siena archmage. When the time comes. Heh. Lin Li was startled to hear that all the guilds of magic would actually risk doing anything for the trial. It was kind of Jiren to send a level 12 magic shooter to cheat. Look at Mason's uncle, he had simply manipulated the rules of the game by bringing in an acquaintance into the team. What was the point of all this in the end? The archmage could just interfere when the time came and everything would be settled then. Anyway, it would only be the few of them who'd know. If no one said a thing, who else would know what had happened in between? So, Brother Felix, just rest assured and follow my lead. I guarantee you won't lose out. Mason smiled proudly, but the closed door suddenly opened again and Oren walked out with a gloomy expression on his face. He looked at Mason as if he was looking at some rare animal. After sizing him up for a while, he said coldly, "An idiot who only knows how to daydream." F***ck. Mason was smiling in self-satisfaction when he heard what was said, and he immediately sprung up from his seat. "Why, you want to fight?" Oren stood there without budging, and a sarcastic sneer came across his face. "You think that only you have an uncle and everyone else is an idiot?" Although Mason talked without much consideration, he was not a real idiot, after all. He held back his anger and asked, "Why do you say that?" "I'm not afraid to tell you the truth. We in the Rotterdam Guild have received news long ago. The archmages who will be following the teams will all be sent directly from the Supreme Council. The reason why the Supreme Council made such a decision is to target people like you." "What?" Mason was taken aback. This was not a joke. In order to get Sienna's archmage into his team, whether it be Uncle Morris or the Chaban City's Guild of Magic, much consideration and effort had been made for the past few months. His Uncle Morris had sent several pieces of priceless magic equipment, including a magical staff worth at least 1,000,000 gold coins, just to convince the Sienna archmage. If the truth was really as what Oren said, that the archmages who would be following the teams would be sent directly by the Supreme Council, then things would be bad. By that time, the gold coins and what they bought that would fall through wouldn't matter much. Messing up the trial would be the real problem instead. Mason suddenly felt his head pounding. His two teammates, one was totally incompatible with himself, and would absolutely end up in a fight with him in 3 sentences. The other one, though easy to talk to and with personality much to his liking, well, in terms of strength. His uncle was right, Jerosa's Guild of Magic had been in a terrible state of decline these 2 years. They had actually sent out a level 7 mage for this trial. And he didn't even look like he had any impressive magical equipment with him. This. How were they going to go about doing this? Warren glanced coldly at the pale Mason, then turned around and left the living room. Before he left, he gave a piece of advice to Lin Li. "You're Felix, right? I would advise you not to hang around with people like Mason. The trial depends on strength, not schemes and intrigues. Otherwise, even if you complete the trial missions, you will lose in the final guild qualifiers." "Ah?" Lin Li was baffled by what Oren said, but when he wanted to clarify, Oren had already disappeared, so Lin Li had no choice but to turn to Mason. "He's right." If it had been a while ago, Mason would have been talking big again. However, the bad news that Oren had delivered had dampened his mood for bragging. At present, there was only one thing on Mason's mind: how to convey the bad news to his Uncle Morris. As for Lin Li's question, he briefly explained it. After the trial mission is completed, a guild qualifying competition will be arranged to determine the final ranking according to the outcome of the competition. "Alright, Felix, I have to go out now. I'll elaborate on the details when I come back. See you later." Lin Li nodded and watched as Mason left. In the twinkling of an eye, only Lin Li was left alone in a room where 3 people stayed. There are 3 people sharing a room, and it turns out all 3 are cheaters. "I wonder what the other teams are like," Lin Li chuckled and began to tidy up his bedroom. He had to admit that the Alana Guild of Magic did a good job with the accommodations. The bedroom had been tidied up for Lin Li even before he arrived. The room was clean, spotless. There was a rattan chair in the corner beside a small wardrobe, and the bed was covered with white sheets and a soft blanket. Although the bedroom was not spacious, it gave him a comfortable feeling. Lin Li opened up the Ring of Endless Storm and took out a set of clothes to change into. While he was taking his clothes out, he suddenly felt something familiar: the 2 crumpled rags. Seeing these 2 rags, he thought of Andoin and wondered how the old fellow had been recently. Was he still bombing the potion lab every day like how he used to? He had heard from old Grim that the old fellow had been in Alana. It seemed that he had to ask old Grim out for a chat someday and inquire about Andoin's whereabouts while he was at it. The old fellow had fooled him by saying that he'd return to Jerosis in a week or 2, but it had been more than a month, and he was still nowhere to be seen. At the thought of old Grim, Lin Li fumbled through the Ring of Endless Storm. Once again. Before Old Grim left, he had left behind a ring with instructions that Lin Li would be able to find him at the Pharmacists' Guild if he brought the ring there. I'll go look for Old Grim on the way to the Silver Hand tomorrow. After deciding on the schedule for the next day, Lin Li started to feel a little sleepy. To be honest, he was really worn out these 2 days. The long journey was energy-consuming on its own, and they were met with the robbers at Black Hills town. He had not had a good shut-eye all night. Now that he was finally lying on a soft bed, he felt a wave of drowsiness overcome him. That night, Lin Li had no idea when Mason and Oren returned. He slept like a log in his room until dawn the next day, when he was awakened by a sudden knock on the door. "Felix, wake up." Lin Li recognized Mason's voice. He hastily put on his robe of wrath and opened the door with a sleepy face. "Big brother Mason, why did you wake up so early?" "I've got no choice, I was forced as well." "What happened?" "All mages participating in the trial must gather in the guild hall before 9 o'clock this morning. If they fail to gather before the stipulated time, it'll be treated as forfeiting," Mason said in one breath, and looked at Lin Li in puzzlement. "Why, nobody told you about it?" "No." "Who brought you here yesterday?" "How could he not have told you about such an important matter?" "It's so irresponsible of him." "It probably slipped his mind," Lin Li smiled apathetically, but in his heart, he made a note of the middle-aged mage called Darien. From the first meeting the previous day, Lin Li felt that this man's attitude towards himself was a little out of the ordinary. He had been too harsh and too cold. They had no previous history of antagonism. Even if he was unimpressed by his late coming, he could have just reprimanded him. Why did he stoop to such a cheap trick and leave out such an important notice? Lin Li could tolerate many things. For example, Mason's bragging in front of him, and Oren's arrogant attitude. But playing such a petty trick behind his back was something that he could not tolerate. It seemed like he had to find a chance to talk to this Mr. Darien. Lin Li hurried to tidy up. Just as he was about to go out, Oren came out of his room. This fellow was still looking as if everyone owed him millions. He merely shot a cold glance at the two of them and left without turning back. "So cocky for what?" Mason groused bitterly as he watched Oren's receding figure. But the Mason today seemed to be a lot more low-key. He said nothing more after the grousing. Lin Li guessed that his uncle had brought him some bad news when he'd gone out the previous night. By the time they arrived at the hall, there were already many people standing around. Over 20 young mages were gathered in groups of 2s and 3s, chatting away. A little farther away, there were some middle-aged men in long gowns, engaged in discussion. Lin Li had a better vision. Looking ahead, he spotted the fellow named Darien. The latter was talking to an elderly man with white hair and white beard. He looked very respectful, totally different from his cynical attitude the day before. "Big brother Mason, do you know who that man is?" Lin Li asked Mason, who was next to him, quietly. "You mean the white-bearded one?" Mason looked at Lin Li with some doubt. "Come on, brother Felix, you don't even know him?" "No, I don't. He's Aldwin, the president of Alana Guild of Magic. Also, he's probably the most powerful mage in the whole Felon Kingdom," Mason answered weakly. He thought that he might go crazy. Sometimes, he really suspected whether this kid was pretending. How could a mage be this ignorant? So formidable? It's more than that. It is said that President Aldwin had broken through to level 21 10 years ago. Perhaps only God knows what realm he's in now. Lin Li was probably more aware than most people how horrifying a power beyond that of a legendary level was, for he had exchanged strikes with Old Grim. Although Old Grim had used only strength below level 10, it was enough to suppress a level 12 magic shooter like him. If he did not deliberately suppress his power, not to mention Lin Li, even Jirian would be reduced to ashes in a flash. If only I had half the strength of President Aldwin. For a young mage like Mason, Aldwin was a true legend. Even though he liked to brag, he had not the audacity to say as good as President Aldwin, but cautiously chose only half. "The idiot's daydreaming again," Oren said dryly. Damn it, Mason's anger shot up at once. If they weren't at the guild hall, he'd have jumped on Oren and fought him. The two guys were now at battle pitch, but Lin Li ignored them. He had gotten used to it. Anyway, this was the guild hall. Even if they were given 100 times more guts, they wouldn't dare to make trouble here. Lin Li's eyes were fixed on Aldwin. He was full of curiosity about the legendary level 21 mage. Like most old people, Aldwin looked thin and slightly hunched. He wore a long grey robe, which looked too big on him. Judging from appearance only, who could imagine that the most powerful magic strength of the Felon Kingdom was contained in this old body? Compared with the arrogant Jirian, the president of the Alana Guild of Magic was on the other extreme. When he listened to Darian's report, he was always smiling and his expression was serene. He expressed his opinions occasionally, but it was only in the intervals between Darian's words. Lin Li was accustomed to Jirian's autocratic rule. He was curious for a moment. How did such a kind old man get his subordinate mages to be so docile and compliant? This was Alana, the heart of Felon Kingdom. In its guild of magic, there were over 30 archmages and over 100 magic shooters. As for mages below level 10, there were simply too many to count every one of them. The difficulty in Aldwin's management was not to be compared with what a Gerosis rich man like Jirian faced. At this time, Aldwin seemed to notice Lin Li's gaze on him. He gave a few more instructions to Darian, then turned to face Lin Li, who was shocked to have been caught while staring covertly. Aldwin did not seem to mind, though. He merely smiled kindly before turning away and leaving the hall. As the thin figure faded away, Lin Li remained in doubt. He felt that there seemed to be some other meaning in Aldwin's smile, besides the kindness and friendliness. Lin Li was in a bewilderment when he heard Mason's muffled cry. "Why is Gryffindor here as well?" This time, it was not just Mason who was surprised, even Oren's deadened face revealed an indistinct astonishment. Seeing the looks on both their faces, Lin Li couldn't help but ask out of curiosity, "Who is Gryffindor?" "You can't be," Mason rolled his eyes. "This person is famous?" "Not just famous, but extremely, extremely, extremely famous." Mason used extremely thrice to describe him. He was praised as Felon's first ever magic genius at the age of 10. Don't you think he is extremely, extremely, extremely famous? He had become a mage officially at the age of 10 and was a super magic genius who had advanced to level 9 at the age of 16. At the mention of this, a trace of doubt suddenly appeared on Mason's face. Disregarding the baffled Lin Li, he began to mumble to himself. "Gryffindor is 1 year older than me, so he should be 24 this year. It has been 8 years, why is he still at level 9? No, no. I must have remembered it wrongly. Big brother Mason, who exactly is Gryffindor?" Lin Li understood as soon as he heard what Mason said. It was another cheater. For a while, he was interested to know more about this super magic genius, Gryffindor. "Look to the left, it's the one wearing the black mage robe." Lin Li followed Mason's gaze and saw a young mage talking cheerfully there. The young man was good-looking, he was tall and handsome. It was only a shame that his eyes looked a little too small. In particular, they would narrow when he laughed, making them look thin and long, giving off an effeminate feel. His black mage robe was exquisitely crafted, it was probably made by a famous tailor. It also emitted a strong magical wave. From what Lin Li saw, the magical wave was even stronger than the robe of Raph's. But what really surprised Lin Li was the powerful aura emanating from the young mage. The young mage's strength was far beyond Lin Li's imagination. Among the young people he had seen, perhaps only Cromwell, who had gone through the transformation, could compare with him. He was at least level 14, or even level 15. Which guild of magic is he from? The Alana Guild of Magic, of course. No wonder, Lin Li nodded and did not question further. Perhaps only the heart of the Felon Kingdom, the Alana Guild of Magic, could foster such an impressive character. Amidst their exchanges, Lin Li suddenly noticed the unusual expression on Oren's face. Oren's pale face showed a hint of agitation as he saw Gryffindor. Although his hands were huddled in his sleeves, anyone could guess that his hidden hands had to be firmly clenched into fists from the quiver of the mage robe. Lin Li was a little confused. Oren had always been arrogant and indifferent. How could he have lost his sense of proportion at the sight of Gryffindor? And then he saw Gryffindor, coming in their direction. Heh heh. Warren, I can't believe you're here. Gryffindor's face was full of smiles, but as he approached the three guys, his eyes were fixed on the agitated Orin. As for Lin Li and Mason, who were just beside him, Gryffindor did not even spare a look at them. Orin did not speak, but only stared at the other party in the eyes. The hands that were hidden in his sleeves were trembling even harder. To be honest, Orin, I was quite surprised. I've always thought you wouldn't dare to participate in the trial. When Gryffindor laughed, his long, slender eyes were squinted once more. The effeminate feel he gave off annoyed Lin Li. Please go away. Orin's words were still plain and concise, but judging from his husky voice, he was definitely not as calm as he sounded. Heh heh. Orin, you're still the same. Alright, I'll leave right away. I hope I can still see you at the final qualifying competition. Gryffindor took a step backward with the smile still on his face, and his contemptuous eyes swept over Mason's face. There was some mockery in his tone. But, to be honest, Orin, your luck is really bad. Look at your teammates, he's actually a real level 9 mage. Wait, as he spoke, he suddenly saw Lin Li, who was just next to Mason. Gryffindor seemed to have discovered a new continent. Oh my god. If I'm not mistaken, this one should be a level 7 mage, right? F***CK. How could Mason swallow the insult? He clenched his fist and wanted to dash forward to punch him, but as soon as he took a step out, he was held back tightly by Lin Li. This was the guild hall. If Mason dared to make trouble here, he would surely be driven back to Chavan City. In the end, Lin Li could not just stand and watch him do something silly. They were roommates sharing the same dorm, after all. As for the something finder. Anyway, the coming days would be long. Lin Li was in no hurry at all. Warren, you're really unlucky. Gryffindor's laughter was pompous amid Mason's ball. You're actually met with such two teammates. Looks like I may not necessarily see you in the qualifying competition. Ha 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 ha. Scram. Warren's hoarse roar alarmed everyone. The 20-odd young mages turned their heads and looked at him in confusion. And then there were whispers all around. Look, that seems to be Orin from the Rotterdam Guild. Yes, yes, yes. I remember him. He's the magic genius who was beaten by Gryffindor 3 years ago. So it's him. I heard that this fellow is really impressive. It's a pity he has met Gryffindor. How unlucky. Gryffindor seemed to revel in their discussions. It was not until the murmurs died down that he went away with a satisfied expression on his face. Warren, if you're unable to complete the trial missions, come and beg me. If you're enjoying my content, please consider donating a coffee. Or checking out my shirts on TeePublic. Let go of me. Mason shouted as he struggled furiously. Yet, how could he surpass the almighty master of blacksmith in physical strength? Lin Li had been accumulating his strength over the years by hammering on metals. Not to mention a mage like Mason, a warrior would not have escaped the grasp of Lin Li. Forget it, brother Mason. Just when Lin Li wanted to persuade him, his thoughts were interrupted by a group of men in black robes entering the guild hall in the distance. There were about 10 people in that group, and their leader, a dignified man in his mid-40s, had a magic staff in his hand. This man looks familiar, thought Lin Li, though he could not remember where he first met him. While he was still pondering over his identity, the leader had already reached the middle of the guild hall. Please be silent. This command, despite being spoken in a voice not as resounding, was clearly heard by each and every individual present. Immediately, the bustling guild hall became quiet. The trial starts now, announced the middle-aged man. Without further ado, he got to his point and instructed, "You are required to take one of the 8 number plates from my hands. Take note of its number and go look for your mentor." Right after ending his speech, a group of young mages crowded around him, and the quiet guild hall grew noisy again. "I'll go," volunteered Mason as he dashed into the crowd. Yet, after a while, he was seen coming out of it with a very disappointed expression on his face. "I was too slow. This was the last number plate left, said Mason in a dejected tone. What's the great deal about being last to collect the plate when the order doesn't matter, thought Lin Li as he remained quiet. Fellick, we've gotten a 6. Before Mason's voice faded, Lin Li saw a short and skinny old man walking towards them. He had a goat-like beard, and like the other mentors, he was dressed in a black robe. Those two sly fellas, and that idiot. Come here now, that old man shouted from afar. Who's the idiot that he was referring to? Mason asked foolishly in a low voice, but was ignored by his two teammates. Lin Li and Oren proceeded towards the old man diligently, leaving behind Mason, who was still standing there in a daze. Idiot! Are you not coming? The old man shouted again. This time, Mason understood whom he was referring to. Let me first introduce myself. My name is Macklin, but you'd better address me as Mr. Macklin, ordered the old man in an unfriendly tone as he glared at them, hoping to make himself appear fiercer than he was. Yet, it was the goat-like beard that gave him away, revealing him to be a pretentious man instead. He continued, I had made a bet with the others on this round of trial that my team would definitely enter the placement round. Regardless of your abilities, if you make me lose the bet, you are going to get it from me the hard way. Do you understand? Yes, mumbled the trio together as they gulped down their saliva anxiously. Their hearts had also started to curse this damn mentor. Louder. Yes, we do. Very good. But before I win the bet, I need to verify your abilities, said Macklin as he glanced at Lin Li and Oren. Then, he emphasized in a serious tone, remember, I meant real abilities. The underlying meaning of Mr. Macklin's instruction would have been clear to any dim-witted fella. Lin Li just could not understand how the old man could see right through him. The mana concealment potion was so advanced that even Jirian would not be able to decipher the real level he was at. Is this very strange to you? The old man asked, grinning, as though he knew how to read minds. Without waiting for Lin Li to respond, he continued, when I was your age, this was what I did as well. Alright, shoot if y'all have any questions. If not, let me bring you to an interesting place now. That was the Nightmare Mountains, the most dangerous place in Alana. The four of them stood in front of a pitch-black cave. Macklin pointed at the cave casually and told the trio, there lives a little kitten inside this cave. I'll lure it out, and you are to battle it single-handedly. I would like to see who can kill it. I shall go first. Mason volunteered enthusiastically after observing how relaxed Macklin was when he made his speech, thinking that it would be an easy task. Sure, you go first, then, said the old man with an amused laughter that caused his goat-like beard to twitch. Before Mason realized it, he had already gone far into the cave. Soon after, a series of groans could be heard by the three men, and that was followed by two shadows emerging from the cave at top speed one after another like two arrows, shooting out from it. Mason, it's your turn now. Macklin left the cave with the levitating spell, which allowed him to swerve off in the air, leaving the dumbfounded Mason by himself. Looking at the pair of blood-red eyes before him, Mason's heart dropped. Was this the little kitten the old dude was referring to? Indeed. What a kitty. Damn him. As a level 9 mage, never would Mason have dreamt of confronting a level 12 magical beast alone. What was more, this beast was the most powerful of the other level 12 beasts, and the killer of mages, the infamous Phantoma Panthera. Mason was facing the Phantoma Panthera by himself. Grr. The beast growled as it pounced towards Mason like a threatening black stroke of lightning. Help! You've got the wrong man. Mason cried helplessly. How would the Phantoma Panthera entertain his pleas? To them, all humans were prey. Who cared if they were plump or lean? The Phantoma Panthera instantaneously bridged the distance of at least 10 meters between them, and appeared in front of Mason. Mason employed the delaying spell onto the beast and the hastening spell onto himself before scurrying off. That old man had to be joking when he made a level 9 mage deal with a Phantoma Panthera. Lin Li saw the dire situation Mason got himself into. Alternating between the delaying spell and the hastening spell would only let him stand a chance of defeating a beast of a level lower than 10. For the level 12 Phantomapanthera, however, doing so would only mean sending himself to death. Mason had only run a total of 10 steps before meeting the red eyes of the Phantomapanthera again. What followed was an unpleasant and terrifying roar from behind. Before Mason knew it, he felt as though he was walking on mud. The lower half of his legs had already sunk into the ground too. Apart from having the speed of lightning as well as a set of sharp and immensely poisonous claws, the Phantomapanthera was also extremely proficient in dark magic. The decaying spell it unleashed landed Mason in boiling hot soup. In such a frenzied state, there was no time for Mason to think anymore. Without hesitation, Mason started to recite a spell in a hurried manner. He could swear that that was the first time he'd ever had such a thrilling encounter. A Phantomapanthera sprang towards him like a bolt of lightning while he recited the spell in the middle of the sludge. In that instance, Mason was so terrified that he nearly died from a heart attack. Just when the blue toxic claws were about to come into contact with his chest, Mason finished reciting the last line of his spell. Palm. A deafening sound reverberated as the spell broke out. As a level 9 mage, it was no doubt that Mason's power of repulse erupted with great force, and the leopard got repelled at least 10 meters away from him. After pulling his legs out of the mud, he fled at once. The 3 bystanders could only shake their heads in disapproval of Mason's shameless escape. That fella was such a weakling. The only method he employed throughout the confrontation was to escape. How could one even outrun the lightning speed of a Phantomapanthera? The excruciating pain inflicted by the power of repulse agitated the Phantomapanthera. Roar. This growl was shrill and penetrating. Almost everyone could sense a strange force of magical waves rising from their surroundings. Amidst the ear-piercing snarl, Mason felt an agonizing and tight pain in his feet. Before he knew it, he'd lost his balance completely, and lunged towards the ground with his face. While he tried to look back, what made him almost swoon with trepidation was a white skeletal arm grabbing firmly onto his ankle from the soil. I'm dead. In that instance, this was the only thought that was in Mason's mind. Then, he saw the coat of black rosettes, prince, leaping towards him stealthily. Yet, the agony he was expecting never came. Only a word came to him. Idiot, moron. What else do you know apart from fleeing from a small cat? Macklin was so furious that his goat-like beard trembled. He continued ruthlessly, did you just use the delaying and the hastening spell? Look at what a blockhead you are. Is this the limit of a level 9 mage? I can easily find any apprentice who can surpass you. Forget it. With the intelligence level you have, I recommend that you switch over to be a blacksmith instead. But, Mason wanted to defend himself. That was a level 12 beast. How could he, a level 9 mage, defeat it? Yet, he was interrupted by Macklin, who stared at him in disdain. Did you want to rebut that that was an unfair battle? Did you want to defend yourself that the Phantomapanthera had a higher level as compared to you? PFFF. Excuses are for the weak. Now I know, you are not only a fool, but also a weakling. I'm not, cried Mason in agitation as his face flushed. You dare to rebut it? Then let me ask you. Why did you choose to recite the power of repulse when it was a great opportunity to make an attack? I wanted to create some distance first. What the hell, you are a mage, not an archer, cried out the agitated Macklin as he nearly spat his saliva on Mason's face. Who taught you that mages need to battle at a specific distance? With the powerful magical elements of mages, you're really dumb to have done so. If you had the time to create distance, why didn't you use it to aim a fireball at your enemy? You could have defeated it. You'd better make sure whom you are battling next time. How would the delaying and the hastening spell be effective against the Phantomapantheras, which are experts in the field of dark magic? To adopt such a technique, you are really an incurable fool. What did you want me to do, then? Asked Mason indignantly. I'm just a level 9 mage, if I don't distance myself from that leopard, do I wait for it to eat me up? Moron, 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 moron. After snarling at Mason, the old man reached out with his finger. Macklin's casual act seemed to have a great underlying force. The leopard that was previously lying calmly on the ground flew up uncontrollably. After which, Mason witnessed how that short and skinny old man raised the leopard up by its neck single-handedly. Do you see this now? Macklin lifted the Phantomapanthera up as he pointed at its exposed belly. It was then that Mason realized it. On the belly of the leopard there was a dark red light, which was flashing weakly. Being a level 9 mage trained by the Guild of Magic, although Mason was not that skillful, he instantaneously understood what that speck of red meant. That was the level 18 dark magic, the mark of decline. At once, Mason's face grew crimson with shame. The mark of decline would degrade any living being by at least 3 levels. This means that the majestic Phantomapanthera he'd dealt with was just a level 9 beast. Being a level 9 mage himself, it was definite that he would defeat the animal. With beasts being beasts, they not only lacked rationality as well as intelligence, but also depended solely on their natural instincts. Yet in such an easy battle, Mason lost to the beast without a doubt. The mere thought of it made him very ashamed and embarrassed of himself. The old man was right, Mason had been terrified. If not for his fear towards the level 12 beast, how would he have attempted to escape from the start of the encounter, and not have any confidence to defeat it? The place where the mark of decline was not concealed. If he had spared time to calm himself down, how could he not realize it? Do you acknowledge your stupidity now? Asked the old man. Although these words were indeed caustic, a glimpse of admiration flashed across his gaze. Making a mistake was not scary. What made it terrifying was committing it repeatedly. Once a person realized his faults, it indicated that there was still hope for the person to grow. Yes, I do, answered Mason with guilt. He nodded humbly as he got himself up from the ground. Very good, you can scram now. The old man waved at him, gesturing him to leave. Then, his gaze fell on Oren. In a demeaning tone, he instructed, "That sly fella over there, it's your turn now." Oren remained quiet as he walked towards Macklin. Wait a minute. Just when Oren wanted to unleash his first attack, the old man stopped him. Compared to that moron, you are more astute. I can't let you do it so easily, Macklin continued. Oren felt a wave of mana. After that, he saw the red glow on the belly of the Phantomapanthera dim. Having escaped from the restraint of the mark of decline, the Phantomapanthera gave a deep growl of freedom. It had finally recovered its identity as the great and terrorizing level 12 magical beast again. Oren did not say anything. He just gave the beast a deadly stare, and started reciting his complicated spell. This created brilliant and dazzling magical runes around everyone. The surging mana mirrored the massive currents generated by a seething ocean. Magnificent, Lin Li gasped from afar. Oren's abilities were higher than what he'd previously imagined. It seemed that Oren was at either the peak of level 10, or even level 11, just a little bit away from Lin Li growling. At this moment, Macklin had also just loosened the restraint on the Phantomapanthera. A black shadow bolted out like a sharp arrow from the dark. The distance of 10 meters was covered by it immediately. Oren's recital was a hastened one. As he raised his magic staff, a huge tremble was created in the ground, and what followed was an ear-shattering eruption. Boom! Soil particles flew up into the air, and a thick stone spear pierced the ground from below. Thereafter, everyone witnessed how critically the stone spear had struck at the Phantomapanthera. Lin Li could not help but gape at that instance. When the Phantomapanthera was running at full speed, it could be said that it was as quick as a lightning bolt. At that moment, it would be almost impossible to attack it with the ground-piercing spell. Once the ground-piercing spell was cast, a shrill cry from the leopard could be heard. That arrow that emerged from the darkness seemed to hit a wall of copper. Everyone could hear the sound of bones breaking, and see blood splattering all over. After that, the Phantomapanthera escaped at top speed as though it was whipped. The ear-splitting shriek echoed in the wilderness, while fresh red blood spilled on the soft ground. Seeing how his enemy suffered massively from his ground-piercing spell, Oren did not spare it any time to recover. Without hesitation, he threw a few wind blades towards it from different directions. Although he was not as skillful as Lin Li when it came to the lower-grade magic, there were no faults in terms of his accuracy and impact generated. Although it had the strength of a level 12 magical beast, the cruel force of the ground-piercing spell was so ruthless that it crushed multiple bones with just one strike. Those bones not only tore through its soft and vulnerable abdomen, but also penetrated its viscera. With such grave injuries, the Phantomapanthera could only succumb to the lower-grade magic. Each of the 2 consecutive shots of wind blades struck at the 2 front paws of the Phantomapanthera. At that instant, what followed was another splatter of fresh blood. Arwu, the Phantomapanthera, howled in rage. The cry was so piercing that it felt like needles to the ears. Subsequently, a wave of repressed magical elements rose up, and the surroundings darkened at once. The blackness cast by the Phantomapanthera's obscurus spell covered a distance of at least 10 meters. **T. Lin Li was startled when he realized the leopard's ability to cast the obscurus spell. It was a considerably powerful spell in the field of dark magic. Beasts like the Phantomapanthera were born with a certain amount of dark magic. The exact amount of dark magic, however, would be decided by nature. Taking the beast in front of Oren for example, it could well be deemed a prodigy of the Phantomapanthera species. Being surrounded by the obscurus spell, Oren's recital started to become intermittent. His previously almighty magical wave also started to weaken greatly. The Phantomapanthera that was still in dire straits not long ago started to recover under the obscurus spell. In the blink of an eye, its ribs that were crushed by the stone spear grew back, and the torn abdomen also healed gradually. At that moment, everyone could see a shadow moving swiftly in the dark. Just like a wandering ghost of the night, its body carried a stench of blood. Oren did not cease his recital. There was no hint of fear on his ashen face, and the glow of determination and concentration remained in his eyes. The distance between both of them pulled closer. Then, the Phantomapanthera leapt towards him with its bright and blue poisonous claws. Oren's spell recitation became faster and faster. The surging magical elements were frantically trying to break from the spell. It was like flood waters rushing against a dam. This was a real gamble as Oren was wagering his life against a level 12 magical beast. At this instance, everybody's hearts were held in suspense. They watched Oren chanting his spell recitation hastily while the Phantomapanthera rushed towards him like an arrow. The Phantomapanthera would turn into ashes if he were victorious. Should he lose, his chest would be torn apart by sharp claws. Yet at this point, the levitating Macklin raised his magic staff. And then, this gamble was brazenly halted by him. 2 blue water curtains, one each for the human and the leopard. Within the rippling lights of the curtain, time seemed to stand still. The leopard that leapt up was weirdly stuck in the air. There was a blue flicker on the razor-sharp claws, and its deep red eyes were sluggish. Oren held tightly onto the magic staff, and opened his mouth slightly. It seemed as though he was about to recite a portion of the spell, but the boiling magical elements appeared to have suddenly solidified, and the last phrase of the spell was stuck frozen in Oren's throat. Lin Li and Mason, who were standing far away, looked at Macklin in a daze. Only at this point did they finally understand that this man with a goat-like beard was stronger than they had imagined him to be. The blue curtains were actually a legendary level 19 spell, Shadow Prison. What was the concept behind level 19? With just a step forward, he could have entered the legendary realm. Lin Li finally understood why he could not decipher the old man's magic level as well as his ability to see through the mana concealment potion with just a single look. The gap between level 12 and 19 was too vast. No matter how focused Lin Li was, he was not able to see through a mage that was close to the legendary level. This had nothing to do with mental strength, it was purely an issue of suppression due to levels. For example, even if you were to give a child 100 Viagra pills, he would not be able to do anything as well. It was nothing more but the lack of prerequisites. From the start, Lin Li already knew the man with a goat-like beard was formidable. but Lin Li did not imagine that he was almost as strong as Old Grim. Old Grim was a monster that could humiliate Lin Li, a level 12 magic shooter, with a strength less than that of a magic shooter. Immediately, both Mason and Lin Li looked at Macklin with complicated feelings. Not bad. The old man with a goat-like beard nodded his head slightly with an approving look in his eyes. You are stronger than that fool. Following those words from Macklin, the blue water curtains disappeared in the air with a poof like a popped bubble. Oren was released from the hold of Shadow Prison. His pale face was emotionless, he just stood there and listened. But, you are only slightly stronger. Once the old man finished speaking, he stared at Oren in a slightly angry manner. You thought of dying together with a magical beast, you're really promising. It would have died. Oren's tone was firm, as though the issue was obvious. Would have died? Macklin was so furious that his goat-like beard sprang up. Even I am not confident in situations like that. What makes you so sure? I only believe in my own strength. Such laughable belief. The old man was almost driven mad by him. You need to remember that you are a respected mage, not a damned magical beast. Your mentor and guild have spent a lot of effort on raising you. Go ahead and ask them if they are willing to trade your life for a level 12 magical beast. You would be lucky if they didn't give you 2 tight slaps. So damn idiotic. In the midst of Macklin's angry howling, Oren's pale face was emotionless. He just stood there quietly and listened. Forget it, I do not much have time to lecture you. Go think about it yourself. Oren had no reaction at all even though Macklin gave him a scolding. This made the old man feel exasperated, and he turned around angrily, pointing his magic staff at Lin Li. Now it's your turn, you cunning fella. Looking at how Oren failed to take down the Phantom Panthera, Lin Li knew that he would not be able to escape this. After hearing how Macklin shouted, he did not say anything much, and braced himself to face the music. How embarrassing. Such a small black cat, yet both of you couldn't take it down. You'd better buck up, cunning fella. I'll try my best. After Macklin finished his sentence, he released the Shadow Prison. This time, he shortened the time given to Lin Li. The distance between him and the leopard was not more than 10 meters. When the Shadow Prison was released, the Phantom Panthera rushed out instantaneously. The rage induced by Oren previously was now being directed towards Lin Li. Amidst the roars, countless dark magic power pelted down. Under the decaying spell, the surrounding soil started to simmer like a restless swamp. Lin Li was calm. He cast Feather Fall on himself. The effect of this low-level spell would not allow him to levitate like Macklin, but it was more than sufficient to deal with this swamp. Concurrently, an icicle whistled through. The reason as to why icicles were so ruthless was because it had the combined effect of a magical and physical attack. Even if it were a level 12 Phantom Panthera, it would have to dodge when facing the icicle. Hell! With a flick of its tail, the Phantom Panthera became a black blur, and twisted in an arc. It dodged the incoming icicle. It followed with a kick from its legs, once again charging towards Lin Li at an even faster pace. However, Lin Li seemed to be oblivious towards it, and continued reciting the spell. At the instant when the Phantom Panthera leaped, Lin Li had also finished reciting the spell of frost. However, his target wasn't the incoming Phantom Panthera, but the area in front of him that had decayed. After that, a gust of frozen air above the soft soil started to form layers of ice at lightning speed. Oren's pale face had a faint look of uncertainty, whereas Mason was anxious and nervous, tightly clenching his fists. Both of them could not discern what Lin Li was trying to do. The sharp claws of the Phantom Panthera were before his eyes, yet this level 7 mage only used a single spell of frost, which has failed, striking the decayed land instead of the Phantom Panthera. Swish! Before Mason and Oren could understand it, both of them heard a sound, and saw that the Phantom Panthera had collapsed. Their eyes seemed to have widened simultaneously. A strong level 12 magical beast had actually slipped. This slip was pretty serious due to the speed of the Phantom Panthera. It almost caused its innards to spill out. It slipped quite a distance on the ice, before striking a tree with a thud. I'll be damned, how lucky, Mason looked on with admiration. The luck of this kid was too good. It was supposed to be a failed spell of frost, but by some freak accident, it became a trap. It had managed to cause a level 12 magical beast to slip. Such an achievement was not something that he, a level 9 mage, had experienced before. This fall was indeed a serious one. Even if it was the muscular body of a level 12 beast, it could barely withstand it. When the Phantomopanthera stood up under the tree, there was a trail of blood trickling from its mouth. This was the second massive impact it had received within a day. It evoked all of its ferocity, and its deep red eyes were filled with madness. Quickly, mana retroaction. Mason became extremely anxious while watching. However, he was too late. As soon as Mason's voice settled, some skeletal arms tore apart the soft soil, and suddenly appeared from the ground. Lin Li's legs were immediately filled with wounds due to the attack of these skeleton arms. He raised his magic staff, while fleeing in panic. After that, Mason saw the sky releasing mana retroaction. Are you for real? Mason felt like dropping dead. Everybody had been releasing magic for half the day, and only now did he remember to use mana retroaction? He really wanted to ask that fella if he dared to be any slower. Just when Mason's face was as white as a sheet, he suddenly realized that the mana of the Phantomopanthera had been sealed. This also meant that the mana retroaction that was cast late had really sealed a spell. Damn. Mason almost jumped when he saw it. The Phantomopanthera's dark magic was all outbursting. It was challenging to reverse the instantaneous outburst of magic. He was only trying his luck when he shouted just now. Yet, under some freak chance, this guy actually managed to retroact the mana. What kind of luck is this? At this instance, Lin Li had already escaped the dense, skeletal arms, and stood on top of the layers of ice. Once both his feet were on the ice, Lin Li cast the delaying spell. If it were a normal Phantomopanthera, it would not be wary of the delaying spell. With just a blood rage, it could reach frightening speeds. The leopard currently could not do anything as its mana had been sealed, leaving it only physical strength. The Obscura spell and blood rage had all become nothing but an illusion. It could but stare helplessly at the enemy reciting spells on top of the ice. Countless fire dragons flew out, and everyone heard a loud blast. The bright flare devoured the Phantomopanthera. Boom! Numerous fire flares sprang about instantaneously. It was as splendid as fireworks in the night sky when looked at from afar. And then, everything became quiet. Mason was dumbfounded, and stared at Lin Li, who was on top of the ice. Only now did he start to use his wind blade to cut away at the skeletal arms that had appeared from the ground. I'll be damned. Mason could only use this sentence to describe how he felt. First, it was a random spell of frost, and then it was followed by a coincidental mana retroaction. When both were combined together, it created a fantastic leapfrog victory. A level 7 mage had killed a level 12 Phantomopanthera. Mason did not know how to describe such luck. Is it the invincible lucky star? Nicely done. Macklin praised him generously, while still Mason could not understand the battle at all. Macklin was an archmage nearing the legendary level, so how could he, just like Mason, attribute everything to luck? Adept skill casting, a finesse grasp on timing, as well as being a born combat genius. This level 7 mage was indeed the most cunning one out of the three. It was especially so for that last mana retroaction. It was definitely a classic example worthy to be used as a teaching material. What was the concept behind retroaction and outburst spells? Even though he was bordering the strength of a legendary level, he only had a success rate of 5 or 6 out of 10 tries. Looking at the calm and composed expression of this fella, he was in a stable state of mind. He'd already known that he would be able to retroact that Obscura spell. Macklin felt that such a success rate was incredible. His heart was filled with curiosity, and he wondered who this fella's master was. It was definitely not Jirian. His strength was pretty good, but not to this stage. He would not be able to produce such students. Other than Jirian, who else could be so powerful within Jirosa's Guild of Magic? Andoin? Definitely not. That old man hid at the Pharmacists' Guild every day. He hardly visited Jirosis in the last 8 or 10 years, so how would he have the time to teach this fella? *T. I will dig out this person one of these days. Macklin could not have imagined that this fella not only had the guidance of Andoin, but had also been training with another legendary mage, Grim Burnside, for almost half a month. I consider that you have completed the first mission. Follow me back to the Guild of Magic. I will ponder which missions I will assign to you. We'll rest this afternoon. They returned to the Guild of Magic in a row of 4. After that announcement, Macklin went to look for Aldwin straight away. Frankly, he was delighted with the performance of these 3 in the afternoon. Except for the slightly stupid Mason, the other 2 were definitely rarely found geniuses, especially that brat Felix. That mana retroaction could only be described as breathtaking. Macklin had never seen someone attain such proficiency at this age. He had to consult Aldwin. Once Macklin left, Warren went into the meditation room alone, while Mason proposed to shop in Alana. Lin Li glanced at the sky, and thought of his appointment with the toothless adventurer. Hence, he had no choice but to reject Mason's invitation. Initially, he wanted to ask Sean to come along as he decided to take this opportunity to buy some clothes for Sean. However, after searching for him in the guild, Sean could not be found. In the end, Lin Li had no choice but to leave the Guild of Magic, and walked along the prosperous streets towards the Adventurers Guild. Compared to the remote Jirosis, Alana felt like another world. Even the people visiting the Adventurers Guild were very different from those in Jirosis. In the Jirosis Adventurers Guild, a level 6 warrior like McGren was considered to be pretty good. After walking into Alana's Adventurers Guild, Lin Li kept seeing multiple adventurers that were close to level 10. Even one of the thieves was already at level 12. After all, it was in the afternoon, and it was the time when the Adventurers Guild is the emptiest. At this time, the missions had just been updated, and most of the people were busy killing magical beasts. Except for those who were unlucky enough not to have a task, nobody would be so free to waste their time in the guild hall. If he could see a level 12 thief at this time, would it not be possible to see a level 15 and above adventurer should he come at the time when the missions were updated? After circumventing the guild hall once, he did not see the toothless warrior called Hank. Lin Li felt uncertain. From what he had been saying, this guy wanted to pull him into Silverhand. With such an excellent opportunity today, how could he not appear? Could he have been delayed by some issues? As it was still early, Lin Li was not anxious. He casually found a seat and waited patiently. Who knew that this wait would last for almost 2 hours? While waiting till the afternoon, Lin Li finally saw him hurriedly walk into the guild hall. Mr. Felix. Hank saw Lin Li from a distance after just entering the hall. Lin Li was about to reply, but he suddenly felt something was not right. This guy seemed to be injured. His right hand was covered in bandages, its surface slightly immersed in a circle of bright red. Are you injured? Small wound, it will not get in the way, Hank laughed, and did not bother about the injury on his hand. He only looked around, anxiously, and then carefully asked, Oh, yes, Mr. Felix, where's your warrior companion? Warrior companion? Lin Li was stupefied for a moment, and then he realized Hank should be referring to Sean. Oh, he had something else to do, and did not come with me. Oh, Hank nodded, and did not ask more about Sean. After exchanging a few more greetings, Hank stood up and said his goodbyes. I am really sorry, Mr. Felix, I wanted to come over really early. However, I did not expect to run into some trouble along the way. Now, I have to report to the garrison immediately. I fear there is no time to bring you over. Lin Li laughed off the matter. It's nothing much, official matters are more important. We'll meet again, Mr. Felix. See you again. Lin Li was not too concerned about his return to the Silverhands garrison, since he had 3 months of time. After all, if he really wanted to go, it would be the same without Hank's introduction. He was a level 12 magic shooter, so he would be treated as a distinguished guest at any mercenary corps. There was no way anybody would dare to reject him. After seeing off Hank from the guild hall, Lin Li stood up as well, and shook off the dust from the robe of wrath. He then decided to go back to the Guild of Magic in Alana to ponder some things. Mr. Fellick, just when he reached the main entrance of the guild hall, he saw that Hank had returned. He saw that Hank was sitting at the bottom of the stairs with a face full of hesitation. Mr. Fellick, do you know Ina? What happened to Ina? Lin Li's heart tightened immediately. Squad leader Ina, she met with an accident. What? Hank had lowered his voice, and saw that the mage's complexion changed. A sudden influx of pressure was being emitted. This energy was so intense that anybody would feel breathless at that moment. Next, he saw that the formerly kind mage had an abnormally fierce look on him. Tell me what exactly happened. One was a level 12 magic shooter, and the other a warrior apprentice. Under Lin Li's coercion, Hank had no room to struggle. He swallowed hard, and said everything exactly as it had happened. The cause of the incident was a batch of magical crystals. Today in the morning, when Hank walked past the Thousand Leaves bar, he coincidentally met a few friends from Silverhand. One of them was the newcomer, squad leader Ina. She had just led her men to the completion of a mission, and was celebrating at the Thousand Leaves bar. After she recognized Hank, she warm-heartedly invited him for a drink. Hank noticed that it was still early, so he did not reject the offer, joining them in their celebration. However, halfway through drinking, a mishap took place. A group of Ruby Moon mercenary corps suddenly barged in. The leader was a level 9 warrior by the name of Marco. They rushed into the Thousand Leaves bar, and loudly demanded that Ina and gang hand over a batch of magical crystals. Otherwise, they would capture all of them, and let the captain of the Ruby Moon mercenary corps deal with them. Apparently, Ina and the gang did not allow it to happen. Both sides had a dispute, which quickly ended in a fight. The opposition had a large group, and even had a level 9 warrior helping them. Silverhand only had 7 or 8 people, and their best fighter was Ina. Both forces were not on equal footing. Once the fight started, several people from Silverhand were already injured, including Hank. He'd realized the situation was not right, and escaped amidst the mess. Hank originally wanted to return to the Silverhand encampment to ask for help. However, he remembered that he had to meet a mage while going past the Adventurers Guild's entrance. He was not sure of the mage's strength, but the monstrous warrior that was with the mage left a profound impact in his memory. The other night, at the Black Hills town Sylvan Inn, he'd clearly seen that the monstrous warrior killed tens of robbers without breaking a sweat, and one of them was even a level 8 warrior. Moreover, Hank vaguely remembered that the mage called Fellick seemed to have a connection with squad leader Ina. If they were to lend a helping hand, the chances of saving people might increase significantly. Up till this moment, Lin Li finally understood why this guy hurriedly asked about Sean once he'd entered the guild hall. It appeared that he was harboring this idea. For a moment, Lin Li rejoiced a little. Thankfully, this guy returned again. Otherwise, he would have been clueless about what had happened to Ina. Bring me there. Should we ask the warrior along? Hank still had some doubts. After all, he'd only seen the warrior's ability in Black Hills town. He did not know that this mage was, in fact, a fiend far stronger than that monster. Now, Lin Li really wanted to kick this guy. The distance between both guilds was at least 1 hour of walk. A return journey would waste a lot of time, and Sean would still have to be found. By that time, it would already be too late. What bird crap would be there to rescue? Upon seeing Lin Li's rage, Hank did not dare speak another word. He only nodded, and hurriedly brought Lin Li towards the Thousand Leaves bar. Thousand Leaves bar was not far from the Adventurers Guild. Furthermore, Lin Li was in a rush to rescue people. He used 2 hastening spells simultaneously, one for Hank, and one for himself. Under the effects of the hastening spell, both were moving like the wind. It only took them 2 to 3 minutes to reach the outside of the Thousand Leaves bar. Marco, what is it that you want? Immediately after reaching the vicinity of the bar, Lin Li heard a familiar voice from the inside. It really was Ina. Being anxious, Lin Li kicked the door of the bar open, and saw that 20 or more adventurers were tying up the group of Silver Hand members. Within that group of Silver Hand members, there was a familiar silhouette holding a sword in her hands. Ina. Fell. Mr. Felek? At this instant, Ina felt that she was dreaming. She could not imagine that she would be able to meet this young mage in the faraway Alana. Lin Li's appearance invoked countless memories within Ina. She remembered the Sunset Mountains, the Wyverns, Cromwell, as well as her father that was facing off a group of magic shooters. Mr. Felek. Father. Father, previously, she was a strong-willed, sword-wielding girl fighting off enemies. Now, she started sobbing. Before Lin Li could offer a word of condolence, Ina had already brought along a fragrant scent and dived into his embrace. Her pretty face stuck firmly to Lin Li's chest, crying even louder than before. It was as if all of her sorrows and yearning were unleashed at this moment. Ina, Lin Li raised his arm and hesitated for a moment, before lowering it down again. He gently clasped Ina's shoulder, allowing her tears to soak the robe of wrath. Within the Thousand Leaves bar, it was silent except for Ina's sobbing. The other day, some people came from the Merlin family. They said that Cromwell sent them. I wanted to leave with Father, but Father used the destruction combat energy, allowing me to escape by myself. Mr. Felek. I am scared. I am terrified. Ina's low-pitched sobbing was definitely a form of emotional catharsis. McGren's death had brought about a massive impact on her. In the day, Ina was as strong as ever. She joined the Silver Hand Mercenary Corps, leading a team of adventurers to hunt and kill magical beasts, celebrating with the team at bars. It seemed like there was no difference from the past. However, in the dead of every night, Ina would frequently wake up in tears from her dreams. She would be in a daze until sunrise. Only after she stuck her face into that warm chest had the pain and confusion from the past started to recede slowly. Lin Li only listened in silence. I know everything. The emotional Ina only started to calm down slowly after sobbing for a long time. Lin Li gently patted Ina's shoulder. All right, Ina, stop crying. Okay. When Ina raised her head from Lin Li's embrace, her tear-filled face was somewhat embarrassed and happy. She cutely nodded her head, and her voice was soft like a mosquito. Let us find a seat somewhere. Mr. McGren left something behind. He wanted you to have this. Lin Li held Ina's hands, and his eyes swept over the group of Ruby Moon Mercenary Corps. Please let us through. Kid, who do you think you are? The one who spoke was a young warrior that looked like he was not even 30 years old. Under a tight-fitting suit of black leather armor, he was barely tall or strong. He held a shining machete that appeared to be made with refined iron. Unfortunately, he was born with a pair of triangular eyes, which caused others to feel malice once they saw him. This woman took 10 magical crystals from the Ruby Moon Mercenary Corps. You want to take her along with one sentence? This is too cheap. Nonsense. Just when Ina was feeling happy and bashful when her hands were held gently by Lin Li, she was slandered by the young warrior. Instantaneously, she was red with anger. Those magical crystals were hunted by us, Silver Hand, in the Nightmare Mountains. It has nothing to do with the Ruby Moon Mercenary Corps. You saw so many crystals that you became envious. You couldn't defeat us when you tried to snatch it away, and so, you captured us. To threaten the head of the corps, humph. How shameless. Little did he expect that Ina was still so hot-tempered after all this while. Lin Li could not help but smile, and he gently patted her small hands. Let me handle this. Ina smiled sweetly. Okay. What's your name? Lin Li's had a warm smile on his face, respectfully asking the young warrior a question. This warm smile was perceived to be a sign of weakness by the young warrior. He immediately revealed a proud look. Marco. Truth be told, even though Marco's strength was level 9, he was only an adventurer. Under normal circumstances, Marco would not dare to offend a mage. However, Alana was not the same as Gerosis. In this city, the Guild of Magic's strength was at the point that made people terrified. With a single word from President Aldwin, more than 10 Ruby Moon mercenary corps could be easily pulverized. There were just 2 reasons why Marco still dared to stand there. Firstly, this mage was too young even at first glance. Secondly, the mage robe he was wearing was too old. With the combination of these 2 features, the image of a weak and abject-looking homeless mage naturally filled up Marco's mind. Setting age aside, the appearance of the mage robe made Marco feel more at ease. What was the Guild of Magic doing? It was a place where chests were used to keep gems. Any mage that walked out from there would be full of equipment valued in tens of thousands. Look at this kid in front of him, he was wearing an old and creased mage robe. It was as if it had been worn for more than 10 years. Who would wear this tattered robe if he was a rich mage? As long as he was not a member of the Guild of Magic, Marco would be fearless. It did not matter that he was a mage, he had more than 20 people on his side. Rushing forward and slashing madly would also kill him. Marco thought he had a clear understanding of the situation. Thus, his tone became more unreasonable. Kid, let me give you a piece of advice. This is a matter between Red Moon and Silver Hand. Don't be a busybody. Be careful that you may not help the damsel in distress, but instead get yourself involved in this. Mr. Marco, you're mistaken, Lin Li smiled while shaking his head. I am not interested in whatever disputes your 2 corps may have. Marco was even more assured that this young mage's background was nothing much. Instantaneously, he raised his voice. What are you doing here, then? I'm purely here, Lin Li held Ina's hand with a smile on his face, to kill people. During the time he showed off a warm smile, an icicle had already torn through the air. With a PFT, the adventurer closest to him collapsed, with a blank look. Amidst the spewing blood, the icicle that struck his chest was still chilling. Hank, is this the man that slashed you? Why? 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 Yes, Mr. Fellick, Hank was standing in the doorway of the Thousand Leaves bar, witnessing the frightening scene. He must have been so terrified that he started stammering and said yes multiple times before completing his sentence. He had not expected that the young mage he'd brought along was so ruthless. He meant it when he said he was going to kill, and there was no room for negotiation. Only up to this point did Hank start to remember. Back then, at the Sylvan Inn, that monstrous warrior meant it as well when he said he was going to kill people. It seemed that he must have been influenced by this young mage. Funny how he was still worrying back then that, without the monstrous warrior's help, they would be unable to rescue the members of the Silver Hand. He felt foolish after thinking back to it. Looking at what Mage Fellick did, killing a level 7 and above by merely releasing an icicle from his hand, what sort of strength was this? Even the corp leader might not be as strong. This sort of people would not even be bothered by the Ruby Moon mercenary corps. Mr. Marco. Lin Li looked at Marco, the smile on his face filled with regret. I am really sorry, your subordinate hurt my friend just now. So, he had to pay a little price. Marco looked at Lin Li as though he'd just seen a devil. He was totally stupefied. What sort of person is he? Marco was the clearest when it came to his subordinates. The one killed by the icicle just now was called Maladinade. Although the name might sound a little corny, his strength was different. In this team, he was the strongest. If he were to be compared with Marco, he was lacking only marginally. Individually, he was at the very least at the peak of level 8. Marco could not comprehend how such a powerful subordinate was taken out in the blink of an eye. The scene back then was too terrifying. He only saw a blue flash, and no other signs. Once Marco snapped out of it, the icicle was already stuck in Maladinade's chest. Marco could not help but wonder, if the icicle's target was him, would he have a chance? The answer sent shivers down his spine. None, absolutely no chance at all. What do you want? Once Marco opened his mouth, his voice was slightly shaky. What do I want? Have I not told you? I'm only here to kill. Lin Li's showed a friendly smile as though he was here to kill chickens, not humans. Now that someone has been killed, I intend to take these few friends from Silverhand along with me. Mr. Marco, do you have any objections? This. Marco hesitated for a moment before noticing that the young mage's eyes carried a murderous gleam. No, no, no. I mean, I have no objections. Marco finished his sentence before forcefully swallowing his saliva. This demonic mage was too terrifying. Marco swore that if he were to see this mage again, he would try to hide as soon and as far as possible. Of course, it would be best not to see him again at all. Very good. Lin Li finally revealed a satisfied smile, and walked out of the Thousand Leaves bar holding Ina's hands. Behind these two was a bunch of whispering adventurers. 7 or 8 rescues from Silverhand were filled with curiosity about the young mage. He was emitting an aura that was strong yet mysterious. Furthermore, all signs showed that his relationship with Captain Ina was not simple.